I will introduce my panel a little bit later, because first I will give the floor to Kitty Andersson, and she is the secretary of the board of OII, which stands for Organization Intersex International Europe. And you are also the chair for the same organization, OII Iceland. Intersex Iceland. So you have told us you will give us an introduction first, so I give the floor to you.
Hello, I'm Kitty Andersson. So I'd like to start this panel off by just giving a brief insight into what the term intersex actually means. So within OII Europe, then we use the following definition. Intersex individuals are persons who do not match medical or societal norms of so-called female or male bodies with regard to their chromosomal, gonadal, endocrine, or anatomical sex. So the latter becomes evident, for example, in secondary sex characteristics such as muscle mass, hair distribution, and stature, or primary sex characteristics such as inner and outer genitalia and or chromosomal and hormonal structure. That's a mouthful. So our simplified working definition is we are intersex because our innate sex characteristics are either female and male at the same time, not quite female or male, or neither female or male. Although intersex people are born with intersex characteristics, intersex bodies can present themselves at birth, later on in childhood, at puberty, when people are trying for children, and even in some cases people live their entire lives without realizing that they have intersex characteristics. So we have cases where someone has been found to have intersex characteristics during autopsy. So how does this tie in with LGBT? With LGBT, not really that much. With LGBTI, completely. Because LGB is about your sexual orientation. So intersex people can have any sexual orientation. Your biology does not predict your sexual orientation. So two intersex people who share the exact same biology can have different sexual orientations. How does it tie in with the T? Not much. Two people with the exact same intersex biology can have completely different gender identities. So intersex isn't about your sexual orientation, it's not about your gender identity, it's about your sex characteristics. Intersex people routinely face medical interventions to normalize their sex characteristics. That is, to make them appear more male or more female. This is usually done in early childhood, before the child's gender identity has been established. These surgical interventions are all kinds, and there isn't sort of one set practice, so they really do differ between countries. But they include, for example, clitoral reductions. In some countries, clitoral amputations still happen. We don't quite know the full situation in all European countries, but clitoral reductions are becoming the standard. Vaginoplasties in young children. These can include cosmetic procedures to alter the appearance of the penis so that it looks more like a standard penis. And these can also include gonadectomies, so that is when either your testes or ovaries are removed. Gonadectomies then, of course, lead to a lifelong dependency on hormone replacement therapy. So intersex children who have been subjected to this procedure will have to go to medical professionals to have their puberty induced by hormone treatment. Most of these procedures are not medically necessary. They serve the purpose to align someone's sex with either male or female or normalize their appearance. So how did this happen that we decided that it's okay to perform surgeries on kids to align them to what we believe they should be? The current treatment paradigm for intersex people originated in the 50s. And there was a psychologist in the 50s called John Money. John Money's theory was that you could take any child, surgically assign them the other sex, and so long as you did not tell them about this, and that so long as you raised them the right way, they would agree with their gender-sex assignment. Money did some experiments to prove this theory, and one of them was the story of David Reimer. David Reimer suffered a botched circumcision due to an experimental procedure, and his penis was basically burned off. Money comforted the parents of this child by saying that he knew exactly what could be done so that this child could have a normal life. And David Reimer was surgically assigned female in childhood, before the age of 2. He was never told what happened to him. He was raised as a girl, and because he wore dresses and seemed to play with dolls, Money announced that this was a success. When David Reimer found out what had happened to him in his teen years, he immediately started living as who he was, a boy. He grew up, he got married. Unfortunately, when his wife left him, he gave up. And in 2004, he committed suicide. David Reimer is the most known case. David Reimer was not the only case, so this happened to quite a few children during this time period in the US. It's important to state that not all of these people disagreed with the assignment they got. So there were actually people who were subjected to this who grew up and lived as their assigned gender or sex. Then there were others who did not. So gender identity, it's a complex thing. You can't predict someone's gender identity. We don't know if the people who happen to agree with the assignment they received, they might have been trans and therefore in agreement with the gender assignment they got. We have no idea. But John Money teamed up with a doctor called Lawson Wilkins, who was an endocrinologist. And Lawson Wilkins became the father of what is now known as pediatric endocrinology. So, using John Money's theories, which had at that time not yet been disproven, this became sort of the standard treatment. This is what we do for these children so that they will fit into society. Because it's too hard for these children to live in society the way they were born. It's important to look at the situation for especially LGBT people during this time period. So what was the LGBT population facing during this time in the same context? So in the US context, what were they being subjected to by the medical professionals? Lobotomies, electroshock therapy, psychiatric institutionalization. to change their orientation. Because at this time, prejudice against all LGBTI community members was extremely high. This practice continued for decades, and it wasn't until the late 90s that it became very apparent that John Money's theories were completely false. They had no basis in reality whatsoever. But by that time, this had become a traditional medical practice. It had been going on for decades without any research to back up the claims of this being better for the people who were subjected to this. But it, like many things unfortunately in medicine, became a medical tradition. If we look at the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 24, states should take all measures to abolish traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. So what effects do these procedures have on the people subjected to them? For some, the effects are not great. For others, this can lead to a lifetime of the procedures lead to scarring. The scarring can cause pain. So for some people within our community, just getting sexually aroused is a painful thing. For others who have to receive hormone replacement therapy, either hormone mismanagement or unwillingness to comply to the hormone treatment needed can lead to severe health issues. So some groups under our umbrella of intersex face issues like early onset osteoporosis. We have 19-year-olds dealing with osteopenia due to the fact that your bones need hormones to grow to be healthy and strong. And when your natural hormone production is removed and you're then on hormone replacement therapy, that hormone replacement therapy needs to be very precise for your body to remain healthy. Unfortunately, not enough research has been performed on the true needs, health needs of intersex people. So a lot of people face a lot of different types of health issues that can in many ways be related to the treatment that they received. But what is happening today is that increasingly intersex issues are being framed within the human rights framework. So we have the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe issued this issue paper in May 2015. Human Rights and Intersex People. It's available online. I'd urge you to go online and find it and read it for yourself. It's very good. The Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union performed a study into the human rights situation of intersex people within the EU. And what they found was actually quite shocking. For the first time, they had real difficulty obtaining data. They found that these treatments are being carried out in all EU member countries. But what they found was that for the first time, the medical community was very unwilling to provide them with the information that they were requiring and requesting. So this meant that they were going back and forth, asking for data, which of course the Fundamental Rights Agency should be entitled to, but had a lot of difficulty obtaining it. So even they say that their focus paper is not complete. They don't have all the info that they should have received to be able to work on that properly. The UN Committee Against Torture has issued recommendations to multiple countries around the world, urging them to re-evaluate the practices that are taking place, to stop doing what they're doing. We don't know what the future is going to hold for us. We're working very hard to bring these issues to light, to sort of cast a light on what has been going on. But we all know that dealing with the medical community is hard. And we all know that the medical community is not always right. So we tie our struggles into the fights of many other communities. We work with disability groups because people with disabilities have faced surgical interventions just to normalize the appearance of their bodies. Surgical interventions that they oppose, many of them. We tie our fight in with the fight of Roma people. Why? Because the Roma population was facing forcible sterilizations for decades. We tie our fight in with the LGBT because sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, these are all bases of discrimination that tie very much together. Even though there are three separate categories, they're connected within this view that all people are either men or women. All people are either men or women with a certain biology, and all people are either men and women and should have a certain sexual orientation. Our fights are at different levels, and across the globe, they are at very different levels. So within many communities, thankfully, sexual orientation is accepted as something personal, like something that you can't control, something that is just, you have the right to love who you want to love. However, that's not the case everywhere. 75 countries across the globe ban homosexuality. The situation for trans people across the world is, in many places, quite dire. So many countries require sterilization before a person's gender identity can be respected. Many countries don't respect a person's gender identity whatsoever. And for sex characteristics, then normalizing people's sex characteristics is quite common. But in some countries, infanticide of intersex children takes place. So in some countries, when an intersex child is born, they don't face medical interventions. They're killed. We all face discrimination because of a very set way of viewing the world, a very binary way of viewing the world. Because we are all supposed to fit neatly into two boxes. And if we don't, what happens then? All our populations know to some extent what happens then. But maybe the intersex communities has been a little bit more hidden, a little bit more silenced, because who wants to talk about their biology being different? So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to just give a basic 101 on the issues faced, what intersex is, and what's happening, and hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Kitty. I think this was more than basic. It was very insightful, and I think we learn a lot of the intersex situation, all of us. I just want to ask you one question before I introduce the panel. you mentioned it's almost 20 years ago since the Mooney theories failed. And I know that was a lot of discussions and publication in the professional community, the medical community. And I suppose it should end in some changes. What do you think are the reasons for that probably didn't happen?
I think the reasons can be manifold. Firstly, if we go back to the 90s, what was the situation for LGBT people then? Not that great in many countries. So there seems to have, within the medical community, have been sort of this fear that intersex children would grow up to be LGBT. And that's not something you want to tell the parents of a young child. There's also the issue of medical professionals framing this in a way that if these procedures did not take place, it would inhibit the bonding of parent and child. I'm sorry, but that's just bullshit. Surgically altering someone to make sure that their parent likes them isn't really something that you should be doing. They've stopped using that as a basis. But part of the reason is money. This, in some countries, not so much in countries like the Nordic countries, but in some countries, then this is big business. In the US, for example, where the medical system is based on money, money matters. So ending this treatment paradigm in the US basically means that a lot of doctors are out of work. I am very hopeful that countries like Iceland, Norway, Sweden, where we don't tie money so strongly into medicine, will be able to sort of take a look at the issues at hand, detach them from that, and reevaluate how we are doing this. But there's a lot of reasons, and parts of them are just homo, trans, and interphobia, that medical professionals aren't always quite accepting of bodies, identities, or orientations that don't fit.
Could you just ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. How do you think it is to grow up with a sex that looks very different from all other children?
So, even though this is sort of the current treatment paradigm, not all children face these interventions. And especially in the last 15 to 20 years, more and more parents are basically opting out. We also have the experience of older people who, for various reasons, were not subjected to this. For example, Hida Valoria from OII USA. Her father was a doctor. When this was offered for her, he said nope. So long as you raise children in an environment where diversity is respected, where this isn't considered to be an issue, I think you can do it well. Of course, in situations where diversity isn't respected, where everybody has to conform to be accepted, then it's going to be harder. Research was done into 2 tribes in Papua New Guinea, where an unusually high percentage of people had one certain form of being intersex. This form means that these children are born looking like girls, but they have a virilized puberty. In one society, the gender roles were very strict and strictly enforced. In this society, these people had a horrific time. As soon as they hit puberty, they stopped fitting. into the society. They were discriminated, ostracized, and couldn't be a part of the community. Another tribe, another tribe in the same country, facing an unusually high percentage of the same variation, did not have these strict gender roles. There, these children grew up. They went from residing sort of more on the women's side of things to residing more on the male side of things, and had a much easier time. They were accepted as members of society. So how society views this is going to have an ultimate effect on how these children feel growing up. But as Mika Van Holla, pediatric surgeon at Oulu University Hospital, said, we shouldn't be performing surgeries on people to make them fit into society. We should be performing surgery on society so that everyone fits.
I will introduce the national panel, as to speak. We have on the left Nora Mehsen, who is the one advisor at the LGBT Center in the Norwegian Directorate for Children, Youth and Family Affairs. Newly started there, yeah. And you are going to handle some of the follow-up on the new action plan on LGBTI, aren't you? Yeah. And then we have His Excellency Hans Heen Sikkeland, who is the leader of the LGBT Oslo and Akershus, or FRI. Then we have Begard Reza.
Also Excellence.
Who is a project leader for Women and Trans Group in Skeiv Verden, where World Norway. And then we have another excellency, Aleksander Sørlie, who is the political vice chair in Queer Youth Norway. I think we should start with around the table, just get some comments on what Kitty was telling us about in a Norwegian context, because I think, I will say, there hasn't been so much discussion, public debate on intersex as such in Norway. And with this background, why is that? Why has this issue been under the radar in a way? Start with you, Hans.
Why? I think it has some to do with numbers. It's only between 3 and 5 people in Norway each year that goes through surgery or medical intervention, and it's about 40 people that is being referred to the hospital. And then we have, I think that Monet's idea, the nature of a nature perspective that he had, lives in us still today. We still think that to have psychological, healthy lives, we need to have sexes and gender engineered to fit the society norms, and that's something that we don't like to talk about, because it's quite shameful idea that we still have both in the society and absolutely even at the hospital. And it's hard when you're talking about intersex, or you are talking about the nature form of doing and making different forms of body and sexes, we also need to talk about that gender only exists in the culture. And I think that it's a hard idea for people to just understand that we are doing something that doesn't exist.
Nora, do you have any comments on the lack of debate?
Well, yeah, it's when it comes to politics, it's a fairly new topic on the international and European and national level. We've seen some developments very recently, as Kitty mentioned, with the EU Fundamental Rights Agency report. Council of Europe is also writing about this issue. Malta is, for instance, now #1 on ILGA Europe's rainbow map. One reason for this is intersex legislation. So we see that there is some movement. On a national level, there is also some movement, as we can see, for instance, with the LGBTI action plan, which is the first action plan ever in a Norwegian context to include measures on intersex people. So in that sense, it's a very historical action plan, and I'm very pleased that it includes intersex people as well. I can't go into the detail of the content of the action plan because it will be launched in just a few hours. So you have to be a bit patient, but what I can say is that it will include measures focused on enhancing living conditions, life quality, and rights of intersex people. So it's a very important step. But of course, this has to be the implementation, or the way we improve the living conditions and life quality and rights of intersex people has to be informed by intersex people themselves. And there has, in the lack of a strong umbrella organization, for instance, for intersex people in Norway, or other individuals articulating demands and solutions, there is kind of an uncertainty on a political level as well how we should tackle this. But I think this is a very good direction that we're heading towards, and I think we will also see improvements based on this action plan, for instance, because it makes the government responsible to do some actions on this topic.
Aleksander, Skeiv Verden is one of the organizations who have raised the voices on intersex.
Skeiv Ungdom.
And, Skeiv Ungdom.
Queer Youth, yeah.
Queer Youth is one of the organizations who have raised the voice on intersex topics several times. But what are your reaction to the story here?
Well, I can say a little bit about what I think is sort of been a bit of the problem with it in Norway. Of course, some of it is really like material things, such like Hans mentioned, like we're fewer people, which means we also have fewer intersex people than a lot of countries where it's more established. Another thing is that, but when we do start talking about numbers, I find it also interesting to talk about the fact that in Norway, we've really only talked about intersex with regards to these corrective surgeries. So this more larger, broader definition that Kitty gave us at the beginning, which includes a lot more people, hasn't really been available to intersex people living in Norway, which means that we have a lot of people who could potentially identify as intersex, who just hasn't had that label available for them. And even though sort of people will still live with these biological realities, without identity, it's really hard to do community building. And without community, it's really hard to organize a movement. And without a movement that's that includes the people that the movement are supposed to help, it's difficult to create a lot of change, I think, because it's really essential that movements are, at least have the people that we were supposed to help in them. In certain cases, such as these severe human rights breaches, then someone can come from the outside and say, well, this is something we can work on anyway because it's so obvious that it's wrong. But with more subtle issues, it's really, really difficult to do anything when you don't have sort of an intersex consensus, when you don't have a community to turn to. I'm not sure if that was clear, but yeah, I think part of it is, you know, the lack of identity and the lack of language will stop people from organizing, and it has in Norway.
Begard, as Kitty has told us, in some places in the world there are much higher numbers of children born with intersex traits than other places. Do you recognize this in your organization, Skeiv Verden? Do you have any experiences with migrants to Norway with intersex conditions or identities?
Yes, we do, because we are like the rest of the society. So we have all kinds of people, but mostly it's only me who knows who is intersex, and I understand why. Like we must. When we talk about migrants, for example, we talk about. When I say migrant, I mean asylum seekers and refugees. We are talking about people that come from a place of war, for example. Like, for example, Middle East, we have a lot of Syrian refugees now, and it's difficult to have an international approach to this when the countries doesn't exist, because Middle East is a fantasy of the like the Western world. It doesn't exist, and it's based on fractions, and it could be like so different depending on where you go, and also it's difficult to like when I meet these people that are newly arrived, they don't know the word intersex. Like it takes like conversation after conversation to okay, all right, now I understand, and then I could like you can go there, you can do that, you can do this, and things like that. So it's extremely important that we do have these kind of conversation and that we do synchronize all our movements. Because we all agree on this, but we must be stronger on this, and the most marginalized in this are asylum seekers, actually, and like the first thing in your mind if you come from war is about I need a house, I need food, I need to be safe. So like I have worked in like with a group in Skeiv Verden where we have talked about these issues, and we have like together made a plan how to like make these things better in our organizations first, because we need to have a safe place for our members. So it's a process that nobody knows about, because it's not your business, it's our business, but things are happening, even though it's not available for white people always, and it is extremely annoying to like be racialized, you know, and intersex. It's not a fun position to be in. And so how we must, that's why I like that you actually had some kind of international approach to your lecture, because it's lacking, and it's actually a bit hurtful when it's lacking, because we live in a global world. So how can we make intersex more available? Must we use that word? Yeah, I don't know, just some ideas and thoughts that I have about this.
Yeah, you mentioned words, and I have learned, especially in Norway, we can use a lot of time discussing terms and labels and which word to use. So I think we should take a round on words. We have a history in Norway and some of the Nordic countries as well. Some decades ago, we We change from homosexual to homophily. Some transsexuals in Norway change the term on themselves to transgender. And part of the reason is that in Norwegian, we only, or sex is sexuality, period. We have only one word which covers sex and gender, and that is kjønn. And actually, kjønn is also used sometimes to describe genitals. So we have a little problem there in the society with sex and the use of sex in Norwegian content. So I will ask the Norwegian panel first. Is intersex the right word to start this work with? If it, so to speak, it starts today with a new action plan. Nora?
Well, in the action plan, we have chosen to use the word interkjønn, which more plays on the sex part of sex and gender in the English language, because we see that some also authorities kind of misunderstand what intersex is about, and for instance use the word intersexuality and think that it's about sexuality. So we use interkjønn to make it clear this is a matter of sex in Norwegian. But of course this is there is no consensus on the definitions to use either. I've talked to patient organizations, for instance, Kleinfelter and Turner's associations, and they prefer to use terms like uncertain somatic sex development, and that's also the most common term in the medical realm, with the two hospitals that deals with this issue in Norway. And then you would have organizations represented in the panel that use the term intersex. So there is no consensus really on how to approach this, and we also see that there is some people feel like they have to distance themselves from certain terms as well, because they don't feel that they are part of the LGBT umbrella, or feel that they definitely are, and then they use the LGBTI umbrella term. So this is also a topic that we as a directorate we have to take this into account in our work as well, that there are a diversity of opinions and experiences and identities.
That has to be respected. We have the organizations here, so what are your perspective on words and labels and terms in the future?
In Free, we use both intersex and interkjønn. Myself, I use the word interkjønn. I think that is more appropriate. Something that I'm not so fond about is using disorder of sex development, as you can see in most of the written language of that has about intersex. Instead of using diversity of the human body or diversity of sex development, we use disorder. I even saw it in your paper that was sent to the Directorate, Ministry. We are still using disorder of sex development. This is not a disorder. So I think it's a good start to drop the disorder word and start having a conversation more about diversity of the body, something that can recognize me as a feeling, living human being, not a disorder.
Yeah, it's a really I was counting one day, like how many countries do we represent in Skeiv Verden, and I like stopped when it was around 80. Yes, there's more countries than 4, and so we have this thing with language is extremely difficult to have with you guys, because we talk in all kinds of languages and we have words for it in like Arabic, in so many countries already. And also so it's difficult. I say intersex when I speak English, because that is like what I see in ILGA, that is what I see in, I never use intersex. I don't do that, because it's not like, most of us don't speak Norwegian, like, okay, many do, but you get my point. So this thing with the language is, we need to make it room for many ways of talking about this, because sometimes it's not even a word itself, but you just describe yourself and it is what it is. So we shouldn't have some kind of monopoly thinking when it comes to terms, because that can be extremely actually racist and Eurocentric. So whatever word fits you, go with the flow.
Well, in our organization, it's been a bit back and forth. Kind of started with intersex, then went to intersex. Lately, we've come back to intersex. A reason for that was quite simple. We had the people in our organization that, whether they have a strong intersex identity or not, but who do fit that definition, preferred intersex over intersex. And that was also what we heard from other intersex activists in other countries when we asked them what would be preferable. And we also found that we had several members of our organization that had started using intersex as a gender identity, which would be translated to intergender, very actively. And that when we used intersex, people thought that it was a gender identity. While intersex was fairly well established, most people sort of in these LGBT circles knew that intersex meant, was talking about, well, intersex and not intergender, which is why we did that, even though in sort of strictly grammatical, maybe it should be intersex, but I still think that we have to look at context, and we have to look at how it's used and not be very, very strict about grammatical rules. Yeah.
So, Kitty, do you recognize these discussions? You're a secretary for the board in an international organization, the European brand. So you should be the person to ask if this is a common discussion all over.
This is a common discussion all over the place. So in English, intersex. Like, that's what we're using in English. Sort of as a general term, when we're speaking from a human rights perspective, then we use intersex people, intersex traits. We try to avoid terminology like intersex conditions, because that can be pathologizing. And I'm very happy that Hans mentioned disorders of sex development, because that's a fairly new term from 2006, agreed upon by the medical community. Even people who use the acronym DSD, they usually have the first D stand for difference or diverse. So, English, done. In Icelandic, intersex has been translated to mittlikin. So we have the same thing as Norwegian. Kjønn is kin. Mittli means in between, so inter. And we don't, as an organization in Iceland, we don't use that, because immediately people think, oh, you're between in both your sex and gender. No. Intersex people can have any gender identity. But in Germany, they've removed the sex part of inter. The same in Poland, where it's interpłciowy, and I'm so pronouncing that wrong. Where that latter part refers to anatomy, sex, biology. So this is going to be completely, even within Europe, then claiming intersex as the correct term for every country in Europe is extremely, extremely Anglocentric. Claiming that Europeans can decide the perfect term for all intersex people around the world is extremely, extremely Eurocentric. So we're never going to come to some sort of consensus on the perfect term, because even within LGBT, that's not happening. There are many places in the world where people don't use terms like gay. They use their own terms. So the discussion shouldn't be too focused, I think, on terminology. It should be focused on the fact that there's a huge range of biological variety within humans. And some of the people who fall out of the societal norms of biology face discrimination and human rights violation because of that. We can argue and argue and argue all year, the entire decade about what is the correct term. There really isn't a correct term for everyone, because people have different experiences, different lives. When we're speaking from sort of the human rights viewpoint, in English, intersex is the way to go for us. Not everybody is going to agree. That doesn't matter. It's the issues that matter, not the exact words that are used. But please don't use disorders of sex development, because like gender identity disorder, no. Being LGB was considered a mental disorder, no. We're not disordered. We just are. And that's okay.
Begard, you had a comment on this?
Yeah, just a small thing, and I totally agree with what Kitty was saying. But this thing with language also, if this event had a different name and a different like description, there will be a whole nother crowd here, for example. So language is important, and we can't just have people like, I know some of you here, and I know you know a lot about these things. Where are the others? I think so. Like I think actually this language thing is important, because I know others will have come if we had talked about it in a different way. We are being Eurocentric now, and that doesn't work because we live in a global world with borders that are, people are crossing borders, and we have like one of the biggest like political crisis with wars and refugees. So we actually have to start having conversation in different languages and things, also in Norway, and it's important that we as an organization get actually get invited to these kind of conversations, because sometimes people just think of us about, you know, the queers see us as immigrants, and the immigrants see us as queers. So it's like really difficult to get a place to talk to, and yeah, and we should stop doing that.
Great. Yeah, like just to clarify, when I say language doesn't matter, of course language matters. All language matters. Just don't get stuck in that as your main focus, because when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of it, it's the issues that matter. The language is what we use to try to discuss them. And not every country is going to have the same language, so we can't mainstream a certain language as the right one.
I think one of the problems with language in this issue also is that we don't have an intersex community, no organization. Apparently both Queer Youth and Free and Skeiv Verden have absolutely intersex issues in their agenda, but there is no organization. But Iceland has. How did that happen?
Iceland's small, so our organization isn't huge, but maybe because it's small, it was in a way easier. So yeah, a bunch of us just got together and decided, yeah, we want to form our own organization. So we did. Part of that was because a few of us got support from the LGBT community in Iceland. That hasn't always been the case. Over a decade ago, I was hoping to sort of start advertising a meeting for people who didn't fit into these strict categories of male and female in regards to their biology. So I called my national, at the time, only LG organization. They hadn't accepted the B or the T at that point. And asked for a little support, like, could we possibly use your housing to hold a meeting once a month? And explained the situation, and possibly didn't explain it very well because I didn't really have the language to explain it very well at that time, especially not in Icelandic. And I was basically just told, no, this is not an organization for freaks. So later, when the B had been accepted and the T had been accepted, and they realized it's not just an organization for gays and lesbians, but that there are various groups facing issues that are interconnected, this changed completely. I've been on the board of Samtökin 78, the National Queer Organization of Iceland. This is my second term. I now serve as the International Secretariat. But that's because there was a shift, and I realized that, yes, here's a place where I won't be judged. Here's a place where my group of people won't be judged anymore. They used to, they're not doing that anymore. So having this easy access to support networks, which were basically being offered by our National Queer Organization, helped us form, organize, and sort of get going. Today we've mainstreamed intersex issues into the queer peer education program. So peer educators going to schools in Iceland discuss the fact that not everybody fits quite neatly into these societally constructed boxes of sex. Not even societally constructed boxes of gender. Societally constructed boxes of sex. Because claiming that there is just male and female and these are like absolute categories is bullshit. Statistics-wise, recent Dutch research found 1 in 200 people can absolutely be classified as intersex. 1 in 200. That doesn't cover everyone whose sex characteristics fall slightly out of these made-up boxes, because men and women can have all kinds of biologies. Some women who have higher testosterone levels don't count themselves as intersex, but they connect with intersex movements because they realize that biology isn't quite as fixed as we're led to believe it is. There's huge variety, and variety is good. We should all like variety.
I want to ask you, Kitty, could you say something about what impact your organization on Iceland have had on the debate and on the debate in Iceland?
Yeah, so before our organization was founded, there were maybe 5 pieces of writing about intersex, all highly medicalized, quite pathologized. There was an article from the chief of the children's hospital, like chief pediatric endocrinologist, about 2 to 3 children a year being born with uncertain kjønn. That was basically it. So people's understanding of intersex was basically either that it was some sort of in-between gender sex category, or that it was to do just about people's genitals. That was the framing, that was what was being discussed. Today we have a lot more writing about intersex issues in a non-pathologized way. The ombudsperson for children in Iceland issued a statement last year talking about how these interventions on children, just because of societal or cosmetic reasons, were unfounded and should be abolished. The discussion is progressing to a place where hopefully within the next, 10 years, we will have come to a place of understanding that diversity is just diversity. Like, there is no one true way to be. We're starting to get there. It's a slow process. It's going to take time, but the discussion has really started.
Hans, you were asking for the floor?
In both Norway and Sweden, almost all the information that is currently available is only pathologizing information, and it doesn't allow of thinking about or thinking outside the diagnostical framework. And it doesn't allow to have an opinion about socialization that does not confirm the male-female idea of gender. And most of them, when you're talking about children and socialization, we are being learned that don't be visible as an intersex person. Try not to talk about it with others. You can talk with your family, but talk as a male-female character. And most parents and families are given information about specific medicine details and don't get so much information about alternative ways of thinking about their children's bodily development. And this is making a difficult situation of both talking about and working with intersex. And then we have a hospital that does not give so much information about what they are doing. And I think that just for 15 years ago we stopped. Then you had to give children information about what they have experienced if there has been any medical treatment. But before that, all the children wasn't given the information about what they have been through. So it's people living in Norway not knowing about their earlier stages of surgery, and that's also difficult.
Because in this debate, I think the narrative often is that intersex people are subjected to invasive irreversible surgery and medical treatment. But is there another narrative, Kitty? I think from a medical perspective, what should the guidelines say on the treatment for a newborn baby, like the 35 babies who are referred to the special healthcare system in Norway?
If a surgery's only purpose is based in societal factors or cosmetic factors, then this needs to be examined. So if you're performing surgery on someone for reasons that are not related to health, you really have to question why is this being done. But it's not just medical. Like, that's not the end of the problem. As Hans was saying, there seems to be a lack of support in many fields. Research into the need of parents for psychological support shows very worrying trends. So this is not a Norwegian research, but it's safe to say that from what Hans was saying, the situation here is similar. Research was performed into the need of parents for psychological support. And what they found was quite worrying. Over 40% of parents said that they needed psychological support. So if we break down those 40% that said they needed psychological support, only roughly 20%, just over 20% said they received the psychological support that they needed. 35% said that they did not receive the psychological support that they needed, just under, and just under 50% said that they received no psychological support. 40.9% of the respondents in this survey said that they did not understand their child's biology. So they didn't have the information about, enough information about their child's biological makeup to give informed consent, like knowing what was happening and what was taking place. Another study called Shaping Parents that was performed in Zurich University in 2011-12 also gives very interesting insights. So in that study, they were not researching parents of intersex children, but they took a group of participants and divided them into two groups. And both groups were asked to imagine that they had had a child, just had a child. One of the groups was given very medicalized information presented by a doctor. The other group was given very demedicalized information presented by a psychologist. Out of the group that received demedicalized information from sort of more psychological background, 23% chose surgery for their imaginary child. Out of the group receiving medicalized information, 66% chose surgical interventions for their children. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the potential of the information being provided can have a huge impact on parents' choice. So, guidelines. Psychological support from day one. Guidelines. Informing parents that their child is healthy. If their child does not have actual medical needs that will cause them health problems, inform the parents that their child is healthy, because that's a horrible place to be. As a parent myself, not like the thought of my child being sick is horrific. That's what scares me. that's what makes me feel like shit. And that's not a basis to make any decisions. Talk about biology and, well, talk about sex as in the English version of sex as a continuum. That there is not a certain way to be male or female. Start by doing that, and I think you'd be amazed that a lot of parents would not want their child to be altered if it's not medically necessary. So reframe this as what it is, instead of framing it as a disorder that needs to be fixed.
Speaking of guidelines, I read the Norwegian guidelines from the Society of Pediatrics in Norway, and it doesn't say so much about psychological support for the person, intersex person, or the parents. But it says a lot about the consideration according to endocrinological therapy and surgery. And I quote, "The main consideration is to strengthen the gender role. In this process, it's important to take into consideration a happy childhood and a strong gender identity, and be able to enjoy sexual pleasure." Does this cope with surgery and hormone therapy consideration in your work?
Okay, so enforce gender identity by surgical intervention. Does that sound right? Does that sound like something that should be a decisional basis when we think about the fact that you can't predict a child's gender identity? To me, it sounds preposterous. You can't know a child's gender identity when they are very young. You can't predict a child's gender identity on the basis of their biology, because if you could do that, there would be no trans people in the world. Even people with sex characteristics that, and here I'm just talking about sex characteristics that fall neatly into the boxes, that doesn't mean that their gender identity aligns with the society's preconceived notions of what gender identity should fit with those sex characteristics. So enforcing gender identity surgically is, in my mind, highly questionable. You don't know what that child's gender identity will be, and it's quite possible to be very happy with a gender identity even though your biology isn't quite in the societal norms that we associate with that gender identity. So yeah, I'm just going to let those guidelines sort of speak for themselves a bit with that. What I'd like to point out is, as you say, there is no mention of, or very little or no mention of psychological support. Why? Why is that not the key basis for approaching parents who have had a child? A child that does not have an immediate health need that warrants surgical intervention, but that's still what's being offered. So, as someone from the Ministry of Health, I'd like to just ask you directly, can you please make sure that psychological support is included? Like, try to work towards that. That's the first step. You can't just keep this treatment paradigm going when there are people complaining against it without offering any support for parents who then become convinced that their child is sick, like that's what they're thinking. My child, there's something wrong and it needs to be fixed. You can't enforce gender identity by any means, because gender identity is personal. Gender identity is different for every single person. Even among a group of people who share the exact same biology, you're not going to have everybody with the same gender identity. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me, but think of it as what it is. It's surgical enforcement of gender, and why do we have to do that?
It's not allowed.
The Norwegian panel. Do you think it's possible to come any further with these issues, the debates, the topics we were just talking about, or Kitty was talking about, without anyone show faces as intersex persons, so to speak, in Norway?
I mean, on certain things, yes. Obviously, we're not going to accept that people experience severe human rights breaches, even if they're not open about having experienced them. So I think definitely you can keep going with the battle without them. But my hope is also that the more we talk about it and the more we put it on the agenda, the more likely someone is to step forward. I think we also, though, have to be a bit careful if someone does, because my experience, at least, is that if being one of the first people to do something in an organization means you get tokenized really, really badly. And it means that you might want to work with other things. You might want to also talk about other experiences. But I think a lot of us who have experienced being sort of a minority within a movement, or having been like early on talking about something that people aren't talking about, have experienced that you get to be only one thing. You get to be this one thing, and in this case, that will be intersex. I think that we also need to be aware that we're talking about bodies, and that bodies are really personal. Even in sort of trans communities, you might be able to say that you're trans. Asking some of the specifics of how your body works, for example, is a lot more personal. And I think with intersex, the conversation, in order to like be looked at as legitimate, you might have to sort of tell people a lot more about yourself than you're comfortable doing, which makes it difficult. So I mean, yes, I think it's possible to go forward. Ideally, I would like to see someone who is intersex come forward, but I would also want to sort of avoid a situation where intersex people only get to be intersex, because I think it's unfortunate, and I think it pushes people out of the movement quickly, because it's exhausting to be that person for any length of time. Yeah.
We are starting running out of time. I think I will end this session with a round table according to in 1.5 hours. Some ministers are going to launch the new LGBTI plan, the action plan, in 1.5 hours. In 2008, the first action plan was released with the T, and today we add the I. That's something we can celebrate. But I want to ask the panel, what should the content of this I be for the years ahead of us? Begard, you want to start?
That question is connected to the other question that you had, and I really want to answer it because it's important. Listen to Kitty. like it's not difficult. Kitty has given us a lot of information, and we need to just do basic stuff as like respecting it and listen to it and do it. It's not difficult if you're just there to do it. And it's everyone's responsibility to challenge these issues. Like we need a gender revolution in a way. And I am just so tired of, like, I've been on intersex debates listening, and everybody agrees, but nothing happens afterwards. And that is the problematic part of it. We never go anywhere. We just stuck with information from people who are organized with intersex issues. But we need to, I think it's starting to get quite disrespectful actually. And that is what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Nora?
Well, I think also that because it's an LGBTI action plan, it also makes the government responsible for talking about this topic and performing action based on the plan. And one of the things that the Directorate will do this fall in connection with the action plan is to arrange a symposium on intersex, because there is a big knowledge gap and there is a lot of diversity within this topic. There is no consensus. So we would like to invite different stakeholders, interest organizations, patient organizations, medical professionals, human rights organizations, researchers, and other experts and bodies from both Norway and beyond to talk about the needs, the challenges, and the way forward. So we also can share knowledge and experiences to inform the actions that will follow.
Hans and Aleksander, do you have some final remarks on the last issues?
I would like to see an action plan based on diversity of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Not an LGBTI, can we say queer, at least. It's an organization called DSD's Families that I think all of you should look into. It's supporting groups of families having children or others that has variation of sex and reproductive anatomy and other DSDs, not only intersex people. And they are doing quite good work in their support groups and have some good information that is it's good to read. And I think that we just need to envision a world where diversity of the human body is both recognized and celebrated beyond the binary system that we have today. And if we can do that, then we have come a long way, and I think all of us can work with that. But it's only the one that has the experience that can work with support and support groups, and I think that's the main issue and something that we need to facilitate. But working with norms, all of us can do that. And I have this paper here. We have tried before, so I would like names and numbers of people that would like to meet other intersex people. It's a short list, so hopefully it's getting longer. But just if you like, then come down and talk with me. Yeah, thank you.
I haven't been heavily involved with the action plan, so I can't speak that much about it. I hope, kind of similar to what Begard said, my biggest hope maybe is that it leads to action. Because we've seen sort of things in action plans before. It doesn't necessarily mean that it gets done. It doesn't mean that it gets prioritized necessarily. So my hope is that it leads to action. So the medical establishment is really, really powerful. They're politically really powerful. part of that is because they sit on a lot of information that is inaccessible to everyday people. It's also inaccessible to a lot of politicians, which comes into what Kitty said. I think about how parents will just give in when they have sort of medical language given to them. So yeah, I'm just gonna sort of end it there, but yeah, I think we need to sort of put the pressure on the medical community. We also need to put the pressure on them to make things accessible, which they're gonna be unwilling to do because it means they have less power. It means they're not gonna be the only people who sit on this information. It means they have less power. But yeah, I think we need to do that. Make it accessible, make the information accessible, and make sure that the action plan gets followed through on. Yeah.
Thank you. I will ask you the same question, Kitty. What your expert advice on what should we fill this I in the action plan with contents? But first we have a few minutes. If there are any questions from the audience. There is. Yes, there is. Speak. Snakk høyt, så går det bra.
I'll try to talk loud. My question is also related to language. There was like a language round earlier, and it's that inside, say inside the queer community or LGBTI. When there's people that, like, my impression is that when I meet people that have, what should I say, like bodies that I would consider intersex, or some kind of issues that I would consider intersex issues. Like Aleksander talked a little bit about it, that there's hardly ever that anyone that actually has an identity as intersex. That there's a difference on like the bodily situation and having an intersex identity. And my question would be something like, if there's such a big gap between who is having the identity in addition to having the like a bodily issue, kind of, if that makes sense. Or, I mean, my point is kind of that intersex is not really an identity that anyone can just claim. You would actually have to have kind of an intersex body as well. But if it's going to be kind of a movement that actually reaches people, like the diversity of all the people that have that bodily situation and has these kind of experiences with the healthcare system, for example, on how people with intersex bodies are being met. Is intersex having or is speaking with intersex identities being or hindering meeting all of those people? And if the identity of intersex is hindering us reaching all the people with all the different bodies, how can we work around that? Or do you need to claim an intersex identity to be a part of the movement? Did people understand the question? It was a bit confusing. But
there was a question at the end there. So I pass it over to you, Kitty, and you will also have the final remark on this conversation before we end it.
Yeah. Intersex isn't my identity. I identify as a lot of things. In today's conversation, exactly how I identify doesn't really matter. Intersex is my body. The experiences I've had, so my lived experience of living with an intersex body and having it altered to fit societal norms, colors a huge part of my identity, but it isn't my identity in and of itself. When I talk about my identities, I sort of talk about my various identities, and then and then I'm an intersex person as well. Because intersex is my biology, not my complete identity. And as Aleksander was saying, it's very easy that people start to perceive you as only an intersex identity when you're one of the first to speak out, because it becomes what you are, what you're doing, all of that. I know quite a few people who don't say that their sexual orientation is their identity. Because for some people, their sexual orientation isn't an identity, it's their orientation. This is a huge, complex thing that comes back down to language, how we talk about issues. And framing intersex as an identity only is highly problematic. Refuting the fact that intersex can be such a huge part of your identity, that it's quite strong in your identity, and a part of your identity is also problematic. Because people have to be able to choose how they identify, but if you don't have the lived experience of living with an intersex body, then you can't really claim that as an identity. So some intersex people do talk about intersex in identity terms, because it's a huge part of their identity. That doesn't mean that it's going to be every intersex person's identity. For a lot of us, it's our biology. Regarding the OII action plan, then the first step is just general public awareness. Like, if a parent's first information about intersex existing is when they give birth to an intersex child, is that a good thing? I don't think so. General public awareness that bodies can be all kinds of bodies, that this is part of humanity's diversity. If this is something that we are all taught from a young age, then this will stop becoming an issue. To the extent that it is today. A huge part of the reason that this is such an issue is that often parents' first information will be the first information that they receive about this actually happening in the world, that not everybody fits into these very strict boxes of sex characteristics should be this way or that way. If parents' first information about this is when they've just given birth to a child. So the mother has just gone through labor. Like, is that the time in your life where you're at your best to receive new information and use that for rational decision making? I personally don't think so. So general public awareness that biological diversity exists and it's not a bad thing. And then changing the focus on how the medical system treats parents and children and adolescents and adults, and reverting to a focus that is psychological support, helping parents come to terms with the fact that no, they did not give birth to a stereotypical prince or princess, but the stereotypical prince or princess doesn't really exist. I mean, Yeah, sure. You can think that your child is the stereotypical prince or princess for the first 4 or 5 years of their life, but as soon as they start voicing their own opinions, you'll quickly realize that they're probably not. And really consider your guidelines. Like, if your guidelines are gender identity based, what does that say? Does that say that we're so focused on people being perfectly this or that, that we will enforce it? We will make sure that it's what they are. And start showing respect for the fact that every single person is going to be different. We are all completely unique, and that's okay.